When twins Naomi and Leah Carter boarded Skyway Airlines first class for the very first time, they expected a few curious looks, but nothing could prepare them for what followed. To senior flight attendant Cynthia Ward, the sight of two young black women in luxury seats was an invitation to target and humiliate. The twins endured her cutting remarks, her pointed glares, and finally her public accusation, "These seats aren't for you." Back to coach, gasps rippled through the cabin as Cynthia forced them to stand, their steps slow and heavy down the aisle, shame pressing harder than turbulence. Phones lifted, cameras recorded. The humiliation was now immortal. But humiliation turned quickly into quiet fury. Sliding into a cramped economy seat, Naomi pulled out her phone, her voice steady but edged with steel. "Dad, we've just been removed from first class." "Yes, on your airline." The cabin went silent, engines hummed. Cynthia Ward had no idea the storm she'd just unleashed. Naomi and Leah Carter weren't strangers to whispers. Growing up, they had learned how to walk into rooms where people questioned their presence before they ever opened their mouths. But this flight was supposed to be different. It was a celebration, 2 promotions, 2 tickets, and a promise to themselves that they belonged in first class just as much as anyone else. To the other passengers, they looked like polished professionals, sharp suits, confident smiles, but to Cynthia Ward, their very presence was an affront. She saw what she wanted to see: outsiders in luxury. Humiliation spread like wildfire, recorded on phones and whispered across rows. Yet while Leah's hands shook with anger, Naomi's eyes burned with calculation. Their father wasn't just another parent ready to defend his daughters. He was the man who signed Cynthia's paychecks. And with one phone call, the balance of power shifted mid-air, turning arrogance into the seed of downfall. The aisle stretched endlessly as Naomi and Leah Carter walked it, shoulders squared, though humiliation pressed down like a storm. First-class passengers whispered behind manicured hands, while those in coach craned their necks, cameras already raised. Unbelievable. One man muttered as he filmed, "She kicked them out like thieves." Naomi's jaw clenched. Leah's eyes glistened with fury, but she held her head high. Every step they took, Cynthia Ward's voice followed, sharp and condescending. "Keep moving. Don't make a scene," she snapped, her tone echoing down the cabin. "Economy's where your seats should have been in the first place." Gasps rippled through the passengers. A young woman shook her head in disgust, whispering to her seatmate. She didn't even look at their tickets. The twins slid into a pair of cramped economy seats, their blazers brushing against worn fabric. Cynthia lingered just long enough to sneer. "Consider yourselves lucky I don't have security waiting when we land." Then she pivoted, heels clicking as she strutted back toward first class like a victor claiming her prize. Leah's hands shook as she gripped the armrest. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "They all saw. They all think we didn't belong." Naomi leaned closer, her voice steady but threaded with steel. "They saw more than that. They saw her, and now the whole world will." Passengers around them shifted uncomfortably. Some offered sympathetic glances. Others lifted their phones higher, capturing every tear, every glare, every ounce of Cynthia's arrogance. The humiliation was public, undeniable, immortal. Leah pressed her palms against her lap, fighting back tears. "Why do we have to prove ourselves everywhere we go?" Naomi exhaled, pulling out her phone. "Because people like her need to be reminded who they're really dealing with." She scrolled through her contacts, thumb hovering over one name, her father's. Meanwhile, in first class, Cynthia Ward basked in her hollow triumph. She poured champagne for a wealthy couple, her smile bright but brittle. "You'd be surprised how often people try to sneak into seats they didn't pay for," she said, her voice pitched just high enough to carry. The husband raised a brow. "Those young women had tickets, didn't they?" Cynthia's smile didn't falter. "Mistakes happen, but rules are rules." The wife leaned in, unimpressed. It didn't look like a mistake. It looked like harassment. Cynthia's grin thinned, but she turned away, pretending not to hear. To her, this was victory. To everyone else, it was arrogance in uniform. Back in economy, Naomi finally pressed call. The dial tone buzzed, steady and unforgiving, before a deep voice answered. "Naomi, Leah, what's wrong?" Leah's eyes widened. Dad, Naomi cut in, her tone calm, precise. We've just been removed from first class, publicly, cameras everywhere, by your employee. The line went silent for half a breath. Then their father's voice hardened. Which flight? Skyway 227. L to New York. Stay seated, he said, each word sharp as steel. I'll handle it. When the call ended, Naomi slid the phone back into her blazer pocket. Her expression was calm now, not humiliated, not furious, just patient. Leah glanced at her, whispering, "Do you think he—" Naomi's lips curved into the faintest smile. Cynthia Ward has no idea what she started. The hum of the engines filled the silence, but the cabin no longer felt calm. It was a pressure cooker, passengers exchanging looks, whispers growing. The story was already out there, and the storm had only begun to brew. The plane leveled out at cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign chiming off. The tension in the cabin hadn't eased. If anything, it thickened, clinging to the recycled air like smoke. Cynthia Ward strutted back through economy, her heels striking the floor with authority she hadn't earned. Passengers averted their eyes, some pretending to sleep, others glaring openly. She fed off the silence. Mistaking it for fear, she stopped by Naomi and Leah's row, arms folded, chin tilted high. "I trust you've learned your lesson," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Leah stiffened, words pressing against her lips, but Naomi's hand brushed her arm, silent restraint. Naomi met Cynthia's gaze, calm and unblinking. "We're exactly where we need to be." Something in her tone unsettled Cynthia, but arrogance demanded she push harder. "Good. Then maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to sit where you don't belong." A man across the aisle finally spoke up. "I saw their tickets. They had every right to be in first class." Cynthia's eyes narrowed. "Sir, unless you work for Skyway, I suggest you stay out of it." The man leaned back, unimpressed. "I'm a lawyer, and I know discrimination when I see it." A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin, phones angled higher. Cynthia's face flushed, but she smirked through it. "Record all you like. The airline stands by its crew." She turned on her heel and stormed back to the galley, but her words only deepened the wound. Every passenger knew arrogance when they heard it. Leah exhaled sharply, fists clenched in her lap. "Naomi, I swear, if Dad doesn't, he will," Naomi said simply. Her calm wasn't apathy, it was certainty. "She thinks this ends here. It hasn't even started." Up in first class, Cynthia poured herself a glass of water, trying to still the faint tremor in her hands. She replayed Naomi's calm words in her head. "We're exactly where we need to be." What did she mean by that? She shook it off, telling herself she had won. She'd put them in their place. That was what mattered. But the passengers' eyes told a different story. Even in silence, she could feel the judgment, and worse, she saw the red lights of recording phones every time she turned her head. Back in economy, Naomi glanced at her phone. A new message flashed from her father. "Stay calm. Flight control has been notified. Do not engage further." Naomi slid the screen dark, her lips curving slightly. Leah's eyes widened. "He's already moving?" Naomi nodded. "Dad doesn't let injustice fly. Not in the air, not anywhere." The minutes ticked by, heavy with anticipation. The hum of engines filled the cabin, but underneath it was the quiet crackle of something bigger. Justice in motion, invisible but unstoppable. Leah leaned back, closing her eyes, whispering, "I almost feel sorry for her." Naomi shook her head, her gaze steady on the curtain separating them from first class. "Don't." She wanted a fight. She picked the wrong battlefield. At the front of the plane, Cynthia laughed lightly with another attendant, forcing brightness into her voice. "They'll be forgotten by the time we land," she said confidently. But even she couldn't ignore the uneasy silence that followed her words, because somewhere deep down she knew this wasn't over. It was only circling, like a storm waiting to break. 2 hours into the flight, the tension was unbearable. Passengers spoke in hushed tones, every conversation orbiting the same subject, the Carter twins and the humiliation they'd endured. Cynthia Ward returned once more, her tray in hand, her smile sharp as broken glass. She stopped at Naomi and Leah's row, tilting her head like a predator circling prey. "Ladies," she said, her tone falsely sweet. "Would you like some water back here in coach, or is sparkling only for first class?" Laughter didn't follow. The cabin stayed silent, eyes narrowing in disapproval. Phones angled higher. Cynthia's smirk faltered, but she pressed on, doubling down. "Of course," she added, leaning closer. "Maybe you'll think twice before trying to play a role you can't afford." Leah's breath caught, rage burning hot, but Naomi's calm hand rested on her arm again. Her sister's restraint was steel in disguise. Naomi's voice was soft, precise. "You're going to regret this," Cynthia scoffed. "What are you going to do? Cry about it?" But the moment the words left her mouth, the captain's voice cut through the intercom, calm, firm, unmistakable. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an internal incident, we will be returning to the gate. Please remain seated." The cabin erupted, gasps, murmurs, disbelief. A businessman in 23A muttered, returning to the gate. Mid-flight, a teenager whispered, "No way, someone's in real trouble." Cynthia froze, tray trembling in her hands. What? That can't be." Naomi's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her lips curving into the faintest smile. A single text glowed from her father. "Flight grounded. Do not engage further. I'll meet you at the gate." Leah's eyes widened, whispering, "He's grounding the flight? He can do that?" Naomi nodded, her calm unbroken. "He's not just our father. He's the man who runs Skyway, and she just gave him the perfect reason to show everyone what happens when arrogance takes the aisle." Cynthia stumbled backward, face pale, eyes darting toward the cockpit curtain. Passengers' phones lit up the cabin, recording every second, every crack in her mask. For the first time, the power was gone from her voice. This isn't possible, but it was, and the storm she'd invited was about to crash down. The captain's announcement hung in the cabin like thunder after lightning. Returning to the gate. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire plane pulsed with whispers. Phones raised higher, the passengers hungry for answers. Cynthia Ward's face drained of color. She gripped the tray so tightly her knuckles turned white. No, this isn't right," she muttered. "They wouldn't. The captain can't." Naomi Carter rose slowly from her cramped economy seat, calm, composed, every step deliberate. The aisle parted for her without a word. Passengers leaning aside, eyes glued to her as though she were a storm given human form. She stopped just short of Cynthia, her gaze steady. "You thought humiliating us would end here. It hasn't even begun." Leah joined her, standing tall, dignity radiating from the set of her shoulders. Passengers began to clap softly, the sound growing, rippling through the cabin. It wasn't loud, but it was powerful, solidarity against arrogance. Cynthia's voice cracked, desperate. "This is my plane. I control this cabin." Naomi tilted her head slightly, calm as ever. "No, this cabin belongs to Skyway Airlines. And Skyway belongs to our father." Gasps erupted. Someone whispered, "Their father?" Another muttered, "Wait, are they serious?" Cynthia blinked, her mouth opening and closing without words. Your father?" Naomi pulled her phone from her blazer, turning the glowing screen for Cynthia to see. The message still glowed. "Flight grounded. Do not engage further. I'll meet you at the gate." Leah's voice rang clear across the cabin. Richard Carter, CEO of Skyway Airlines. The name detonated like a bomb. Heads whipped around, murmurs swelled into shouts. The CEO's daughters? She kicked the CEO's kids out of first class? Oh my God, she's finished. Cynthia staggered back, tray clattering to the floor. No, this can't." Naomi stepped closer, her voice soft, almost merciful. "You saw 2 black women in first class and thought we didn't belong. You didn't see who we were. You didn't see what we carry." Leah's tone sharpened, steel beneath silk, "and now the whole world will." Passengers cheered, some clapping, others raising their phones higher, capturing every trembling second of Cynthia's unraveling. The balance of power had flipped so violently, so completely, that even the cabin walls seemed to hum with it. The intercom chimed again. "Ladies and gentlemen, please prepare for landing. Ground authorities will meet us at the gate." We apologize for the disruption. Cynthia's breath came fast and shallow. Her voice shrieked, brittle. You can't do this to me. I've worked 20 years for this airline. You can't. Naomi's gaze didn't waver. You did this to yourself. And as the engines roared louder, dragging the plane down toward the runway, Cynthia Ward finally realized she wasn't the authority here. She wasn't untouchable. She wasn't even safe. Her arrogance had written her downfall, and it was already signed. The descent was silent except for the engines. No chatter, no laughter, just the heavy anticipation of a cabin waiting for judgment. Every passenger knew they were witnessing something bigger than a flight delay. The wheels screeched against the tarmac, the plane shuddering as it slowed. Outside the windows, flashing blue lights lined the runway. Police cruisers, airport security, and in the center, a black sedan gleamed under the floodlights. Leah gripped Naomi's hand. He's here. The jetway locked with a hollow thud. Passengers craned their necks, phones ready, whispering like an audience waiting for the curtain to rise. Then he appeared. Richard Carter, CEO of Skyway Airlines, climbed the jetway steps with the gravity of a storm. Tall, composed, dressed in a navy suit, his presence filled the cabin before he spoke a word. Cameras zoomed, passengers gasped, and Cynthia's breath caught in her throat. Dead, Naomi said softly, her voice carrying pride and relief. Richard's eyes scanned the cabin, then landed on Cynthia. His tone was steady, lethal in its calm. Who humiliated my daughters? Cynthia stumbled forward, her words tumbling out. Mr. Carter, I didn't know they didn't. Richard cut her off with a single raised hand. You didn't need to know. Their tickets were valid. Their seats were theirs. What you chose to see was the color of their skin, not the ink on their boarding passes. Passengers erupted in murmurs, nods, and gasps. Someone whispered, he said it, out loud. Cynthia's face flushed scarlet. Sir, please. I was only following procedure. Richard's voice sharpened. Procedure. Show me where Skyway procedure allows the removal of paying customers without review. Show me where procedure permits humiliation, threats, and slurs. She stammered, her hands trembling. You can't, Richard said, his voice dropping to ice, because no such policy exists. What does exist is a standard of dignity, one you've just shredded. Applause broke out from the passengers, a wave of claps swelling down the aisle. Cynthia flinched as the sound grew louder, drowning out her excuses. Richard turned to Naomi and Leah, his eyes softening. Are you all right? Leah nodded, though her voice trembled. We're fine now. Richard's jaw tight. You should never have had to call me for protection in the first place. Not here. Not in my airline. He faced the cabin again, his voice rising. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for what you've endured today. Skyway is built on the promise that every passenger deserves respect. That promise was broken. Cynthia wilted under the weight of his words, her arrogance stripped bare. She whispered, please, don't fire me. Richard's eyes narrowed. Don't fire you, Miss Ward. By the time this plane is cleared, you won't be a Skyway employee. By the end of the week, you'll be the face of a training video titled, What Never to Do. The cabin roared with laughter, claps, even cheers. Cynthia's knees buckled as she collapsed into a nearby seat, her authority gone, her career dissolving before her eyes. And in that moment, Naomi and Leah's humiliation flipped into vindication, witnessed, recorded, and shared by every soul on that plane. The cabin pulsed with applause that refused to die down. Naomi and Leah Carter sat straighter now, dignity restored, while Cynthia Ward shrank into the shadows of her own collapse. Her once crisp uniform looked wrinkled under the spotlight of judgment, her posture sagging beneath the weight of truth. Richard Carter lifted his hand, and the clapping quieted. His voice carried like a verdict. This flight does not move another inch until we address what happened here. The captain appeared from the cockpit, his face tense. Mr. Carter, ground control has already cleared us. The airline board is monitoring. Richard nodded, his eyes never leaving Cynthia. Good. Let them monitor. Let the world see what accountability looks like. He gestured toward the sisters. 2 paying passengers. 2 women who did nothing but take their rightful seats, and yet they were degraded, paraded down this aisle like criminals. Passengers nodded, murmurs swelling. Exactly. We saw everything. She did it. Richard's gaze cut back to Cynthia. You didn't just fail as an attendant. You failed as a human being, and because of that, this flight is grounded until you step off this plane in uniform for the last time. Cynthia's lips trembled. You can't humiliate me like this. Not in front of Richard's tone sharpened. Final. Humiliation is not what's happening to you, Miss Ward. Accountability is. The humiliation was reserved for my daughters and you delivered it. Gasps followed. Cameras zoomed in. Cynthia's face crumpled, the last threads of arrogance unraveling. 2 uniformed airport security officers boarded through the jetway, their boots echoing on the cabin floor. Miss Ward, one said flatly, you're being relieved of duty. Gather your things. Her eyes darted desperately, searching for sympathy. None came. Not from the crew, not from the passengers, not from the sisters she had targeted. Only silence and the cold whir of phones recording her downfall. Hands shaking, Cynthia removed her apron, dropped her badge into the officer's palm, and shuffled toward the exit. The applause reignited, louder this time, passengers cheering as if justice itself had boarded the plane. Leah whispered, I almost can't believe this. Naomi squeezed her hand. Believe it. She wanted to strip us of dignity. Now she's lost hers. As Cynthia disappeared down the jetway, Richard turned back to the passengers, his tone warm but resolute. Ladies and gentlemen, I regret the delay, but respect and justice cannot be delayed. We'll be recrewing this flight, and every passenger here will be compensated for what you endured. Cheers followed, some passengers even standing to clap. A businessman near the front raised his voice. Your daughters handled themselves with more class than anyone I've ever seen. Naomi and Leah flushed, but Richard simply nodded. They've had practice. The sisters exchanged a look, half pride, half relief. They hadn't wanted a fight, but when it came to them, they hadn't backed down. As the applause echoed once more, Richard Carter's voice sealed the moment. On Skyway Airlines, dignity will always fly first class. The cabin erupted one last time. Cheers and clapping loud enough to drown even the engine. And in the middle of it all, Naomi and Leah sat tall, not as victims, not even as daughters of the CEO, but as women who had reclaimed their place with quiet, unshakable strength. By the time the plane rolled back to the gate, the story had already left the cabin. Dozens of passengers had streamed live videos, clips spreading across social media with captions like CEO's daughters kicked from first class and Skyway attendant humiliates black sisters, watch what happens next. News vans were waiting outside, their satellite dishes aimed skyward like weapons. Reporters jostled against the terminal windows as the jet bridge sealed. Inside, the cabin hummed with a strange energy, equal parts relief and anticipation. Naomi and Leah sat quietly, shoulders squared, their phones vibrating with messages. Naomi scrolled, her lips tightening. It's already everywhere, she murmured, trending in less than 30 minutes. Leah exhaled, half nervous, half thrilled. Then everyone will see what really happened. Cynthia Ward, pale and trembling, was escorted off first. The applause that had followed her exit earlier reignited in the terminal as passengers disembarked. Phones lit the corridor, recording her as she was led past, her head bowed, her name already etched into infamy. Security ushered Naomi and Leah next, with Richard walking between them like a shield. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust out, flashes popping like fireworks. Mr. Carter, is it true your daughters were removed from first class because of racial bias? Naomi, Leah, how did it feel to be humiliated in front of the entire cabin? Will Cynthia Ward face charges? Richard's hand lifted, silencing the frenzy. His voice was steady, deliberate. What happened today was unacceptable. My daughters were passengers, customers entitled to the same respect as anyone else. Instead, they were targeted, humiliated, and degraded. Gasps echoed through the terminal. The cameras leaned in close. This is not just a personal matter, Richard continued. It is a corporate one. Skyway Airlines was built on the principle that every passenger, regardless of wealth, race, or background, deserves dignity. That principle was violated today. The reporters roared with more questions, but Richard gestured toward his daughters. They can speak for themselves. Naomi straightened, her voice calm but powerful. We didn't want to fight, we just wanted to sit in the seats we paid for. But when we were forced to walk back to coach, everyone saw it. Everyone recorded it. And that's what changed everything, because the truth can't be hidden anymore. Leah added softly, we didn't ask to be CEO's daughters today. We asked to be treated like people. That's all anyone should expect when they board a plane. The crowd erupted, cheers, clapping, shouts of support. Reporters shouted over each other, their lenses capturing every word, every steady breath. Cynthia, watching from a distance with security flanking her, felt the roar cut through her like knives. She had wanted to assert control, to make two women feel small. Instead, she had ignited a storm that would haunt her career, her reputation, her life. Back at the podium, Richard's voice closed the moment with iron. This flight was grounded because dignity matters more than timetables. If one employee cannot uphold that standard, then we will rebuild from their failure. I will personally oversee the review, and there will be no corner to hide from accountability. The applause thundered again. Cameras flashed until the sisters' faces were seared into headlines. And in that blaze of light, Naomi and Leah Carter stood not as humiliated passengers, but as symbols of what happens when dignity refuses to bow. The scandal didn't fade, it exploded. Within 48 hours, major news outlets plastered Cynthia Ward's face across every screen. Headlines screamed, Skyway attendant humiliates CEO's daughters. Flight grounded after racial bias incident. Entitlement at 30,000. Cynthia tried to vanish, but the internet was merciless. Every clip of her sneering words, every second of Naomi and Leah's quiet endurance was replayed, dissected, and condemned. Memes turned her arrogance into satire. Think pieces turned her procedure excuse into the butt of national conversations about discrimination. Skyway Airlines acted swiftly. Richard Carter ordered a full review of hiring and training policies. Within a week, Cynthia was officially terminated, her name permanently blacklisted in the industry. But her troubles didn't stop there. Civil rights groups filed complaints, passengers offered testimony, and within a month, she sat at the defense table of a courtroom, her former uniform nowhere in sight. The courthouse was packed. Cameras lined the steps, reporters shoved microphones toward every passerby, and the Carter sisters walked in flanked by their father. Naomi's chin was high, Leah's expression steady. Inside, the judge's gavel silenced the murmurs. The charges: wrongful removal of passengers, racial discrimination, and conduct unbecoming of a licensed flight attendant. Cynthia's lawyer tried to paint her as stressed and misinterpreted, but the prosecution came armed with dozens of passenger videos, angles from every row, every damning word preserved in high-definition clarity. The footage played on courtroom screen. Cynthia's voice rang out, "This seat isn't for your kind." The slap of authority as she ripped tickets, the condescension as she smirked, forcing the sisters down the aisle. The gallery gasped. Some shook their heads, others whispered angrily. When Naomi took the stand, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "We didn't resist," she said softly. "We showed our tickets. We explained we belonged there, but she didn't see us. She only saw what she wanted to." Leah followed, her voice sharper. "I've been through security checkpoints. I've faced long lines. I've been told rules are rules. I've never been told my existence didn't belong in first class until that day." The jury shifted uncomfortably. The defense lawyer muttered objections, but the truth was undeniable. When the verdict came, it was swift. Liable for discrimination and misconduct. Cynthia was ordered to pay damages, barred from working in aviation, and sentenced to community service under public oversight. The cameras swarmed again outside the courthouse. Reporters hurled questions. "Naomi, Leah, do you feel justice was served?" Naomi answered with dignity. "Justice isn't just a verdict. Justice is knowing no one else has to face what we faced." Leah added, "Our father grounded a plane that day. The courts grounded discrimination today." Their words ran on every channel. Within hours, airlines across the country announced new mandatory anti-bias training, citing the Carter precedent. For Cynthia Ward, the fall was absolute. For Naomi and Leah, the vindication was undeniable. And for Skyway Airlines, a reckoning had begun. Its image rebuilt not on first-class arrogance, but on the resilience of two sisters who refused to shrink. Weeks turned into months, but the echoes of that flight never faded. The clip of Naomi and Leah being marched down the aisle and their father grounding the plane became one of the most watched videos of the year. Yet what lingered most wasn't Cynthia Ward's downfall, but the sisters' unshakable composure in the face of humiliation. Communities rallied, civil rights groups invited Naomi and Leah to speak at conferences, universities extended invitations for leadership panels, newspapers called them the Carter Sisters, a title that grew into a symbol of grace under fire. But Naomi and Leah never saw themselves as heroes. In interviews, they always redirected the spotlight. "This isn't just about us," Naomi said on a morning show. "It's about every passenger who's ever been treated as if their worth depended on their appearance, not their ticket." Leah added, "We want our story to remind people. Silence enables arrogance. Speaking out grounds it." Skyway Airlines leaned into reform. Richard Carter established the Dignity First Initiative, a sweeping policy overhaul that retrained every employee, instituted independent oversight, and created a new passenger Bill of Rights. Other airlines followed, each announcing programs aimed at preventing bias. In aviation circles, the phrase "don't pull a Cynthia" became shorthand for unchecked arrogance and abuse of power. For Cynthia herself, obscurity replaced entitlement. Former neighbors described her as unrecognizable, quiet, almost haunted. The woman who once sneered in first class now lived with the permanent mark of her downfall. Meanwhile, the Carter sisters thrived. Naomi published essays about dignity in professional spaces, while Leah launched a mentorship program for young women of color entering corporate fields. Their story wasn't just a viral scandal anymore. It had become a blueprint for resilience. One evening, months later, the sisters boarded another Skyway flight. This time, no one questioned their seat. Flight attendants offered warm smiles, passengers nodded in recognition, and one young girl whispered to her mother, "That's them." As the plane lifted into the clouds, Leah leaned back and smiled. "Feels different this time." Naomi glanced out the window, the lights of the city glowing below. "It should. We turned turbulence into a course correction." Her words hung in the cabin like truth itself, steady, undeniable, and stronger than the engines carrying them forward. The frenzy eventually faded. Headlines moved on, viral clips were replaced by the next scandal. But for Naomi and Leah Carter, life had permanently changed. What they carried wasn't just the memory of humiliation. It was the strange weight of becoming a symbol. At first, it was overwhelming. Everywhere they went, strangers recognized them, in grocery aisles, on sidewalks, even boarding flights. Some offered hugs, others whispered thank yous, and a few simply stared, unsure how to speak to women who had turned turbulence into justice. Naomi handled it with measured grace. She'd always been the quieter sister, the strategist. When people asked how she stayed calm, she answered honestly, "Because I knew anger was what she wanted. I refused to give her that." Leah was bolder, unafraid to call Cynthia's actions what they were, arrogance fueled by prejudice. But even she admitted the weight of constant recognition wore her down. "Sometimes I just want to be Leah, not the Carter sister," she confessed one night over dinner. Their father understood. Richard Carter had lived under a spotlight for decades, but even he admitted this was different. "You didn't just represent the airline," he told them. "You represented everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." That's a heavy legacy, but it's also a powerful one. Slowly, the sisters began to reframe their experience. They returned to their routines, work, friendships, quiet weekends, but each interaction carried new resonance. When a young woman of color approached Leah after a corporate event and said, "I stayed in my program because of you," Leah realized their story had become more than a viral clip. It was fuel. Naomi discovered the same when she was invited to write for a national magazine. Her essay, Dignity at 30,000 Feet, wasn't about Cynthia at all. It was about her grandmother, who had taught her never to bow her head to arrogance. The piece went viral, not as scandal, but as inspiration. The sisters began to heal not by forgetting, but by transforming. Every reminder of that day, the whispers, The recordings, the questions became an opportunity to steer the conversation away from humiliation and toward resilience. And in quiet moments when the cameras were gone, they reminded each other why they endured. "We weren't just passengers," Naomi whispered once. "We were proof." Leah squeezed her hand and smiled. And proof doesn't fade. Outside, the world might have seen them as symbol. Inside, they remained what they had always been. Sisters, steady in their bond, stronger than turbulence, grounded by dignity that no one could take away. The Carter sisters never sought to become activists, but the world had decided otherwise. Invitations poured in from universities, community groups, corporate conferences. At first, Naomi and Leah hesitated. They weren't politicians, and they weren't seeking platforms. But every letter they received, every voice that said, "You gave me courage," pushed them forward. Leah embraced it first. She launched a mentorship program for young women of color entering corporate fields, teaching them how to navigate spaces where their worth might be doubted. "You don't shrink," she told her mentees. "You claim your seat, and if someone tries to take it, you fight with dignity." Within months, her program expanded nationwide, drawing volunteers and corporate sponsors who believed in her vision. Naomi, ever the strategist, channeled her energy into storytelling. She began writing essays and giving keynote speeches about resilience. She spoke not just about the flight, but about the broader truth, how dignity was not a luxury, but a right. One of her essays, "First Class is a Mindset," was taught in college classrooms. Another, "Silence as Power," went viral globally, translated into 5 languages. Their father's Dignity First initiative became more than an airline policy. It sparked an industry shift. Other airlines followed, adopting similar reforms. Passengers began sharing stories of improved treatment, and flight attendants described renewed accountability. Naomi and Leah were invited to help design diversity training modules, ensuring that their ordeal became a case study in empathy and change. But what struck them most wasn't the policies, it was the people. At events, young girls stood in line for hours to hug them. Parents thanked them for teaching their children about courage. One teenager handed Leah a sketchbook filled with drawings of her and Naomi standing tall in a crowded cabin, halos of light around their heads. "You're heroes to me," the girl whispered. Leah cried for the first time since the flight. The sisters' bond deepened too. Late nights turned into strategy sessions, with Naomi drafting essays while Leah planned workshops. They laughed about how they had gone from passengers to leaders, from targets of arrogance to architects of reform. "We turned her slap into a movement," Leah joked once, and Naomi, with her usual quiet smile, replied, "We turned her arrogance into our runway." Even strangers in airports began to treat them different. Flight attendants discreetly upgraded their seats. Passengers offered nods of respect, and some simply whispered, "Thank you." The sisters accepted it with humility, but always reminded people, this isn't about us. It's about everyone who deserves dignity. And slowly, the humiliation of that day transformed into something unbreakable. The Carter sisters weren't just remembered as victims of injustice. They were remembered as catalysts who turned arrogance into accountability, humiliation into honor. Months later, the noise had settled. The Carter sisters had returned to some semblance of normal life, though normal would never mean the same again. They were no longer just professionals with good jobs and quiet lives. They were symbols, and yet, in the stillness of their own home, they were just Naomi and Leah's sisters, daughters, women who had weathered a storm together. On a quiet Sunday evening, they sat on the porch of their childhood home, the autumn air cool against their skin. Leah leaned back in her chair, watching the stars emerge. "Funny," she murmured, "how one flight changed everything." Naomi smiled, a soft curve of lips. "It didn't change who we are. It just reminded the world who we've always been." Their father stepped out, carrying 3 mugs of tea, his eyes proud. He had spent his career building an airline empire, but nothing compared to watching his daughters stand taller than arrogance itself. Legacy isn't what you build in boardrooms, he told them. It's what you stand for when the world tries to push you down. Later that week, they boarded another flight. This time on a different airline, this time with no cameras, no whispers. They took their seats in first class without hesitation. Passengers smiled, attendants greeted them with respect. And for the first time since that fateful day, it felt as if the cabin itself had shifted. As the plane climbed into the clouds, Leah glanced at her sister. Do you ever wonder what people will remember most about us? Naomi gazed out the window, city lights vanishing beneath the dark. Not the humiliation, not her face. They'll remember that we didn't break. The engines roared steady, a lullaby of forward motion. Naomi rested her head back. Leah clasped her hand, and together they let the silence speak louder than words. Outside, the world would continue to tell their story on news programs, in classrooms, in whispered encouragements between strangers. But inside that cabin, there was only peace. Two sisters, side by side, carrying dignity that no one could strip away. And somewhere between earth and sky, they finally felt weightless. Not because the plane carried them, but because they had lifted themselves beyond the reach of arrogance, grounded only by the strength of their own unshakable bond.